we go. If you are here for CE credit, please be sure to give me your name and email address in the chat, or you can email it to me at dbrown@vfhs.org. And I'll give you a reminder at the end as well. And we have Rob Leinberger on here, who is going to talk to you about the care of companion animals in Virginia. Take it away, Rob.
Oh, it's all me. Great.
On you.
Fantastic. All right, this is going to be fun. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob Leinberger. I am the Program and Operations Supervisor here in the city of Richmond. Prior to that, I spent some time with Chesterfield County for about 24 years as an animal control officer, and I've been with Richmond for the past 8.5 years. So I've been around the block for over 30 years in the animal care and control world in Virginia. I've done stuff with the National Animal Care and Control Association, president, past president. I'm currently on the Virginia Animal Control Association board, been past president, vice president for that organization as well. Done quite a few things. I met a lot of great people along the way. Still meeting fantastic people, and look forward to continuing meeting people. This particular class, this particular session, one of the things that I find most important in what animal care and control folks do, animal control officers, shelter workers, volunteers, just about everybody from all walks of life in the animal care, control, and welfare world, the care of companion animals by the owner is probably the foundation of what we all have to deal with and what we all have to look at. I have found it to be something that's both easy and a little complex at times, but it gives us direction in how we look at things when it comes to the requirements that pet owners in Virginia are required to do. And it's mandatory. It's the minimum requirements. We might have, and I know I've talked with plenty of people that have greater expectation of how pets are supposed to be cared for, but when we look at it from the law, we kind of have to tone it down a little bit in some cases. So it's important to note that this class, the care of companion animals, is what the law requires. It isn't what we want, because Lord knows I want more stuff for people, more stuff for pets than what the law requires. But again, if we start with the foundation of the law, it gives us something to utilize going forward. Let's see here. So kind of what we're gonna look at is what exactly is required, and it's a fair amount, and some of you may be familiar with it already, and some of you may need some refresher, and some of you may have never heard of it in the first place. So having this conversation will give you at least a little bit of a foundation or reinforce what you already know as we go through this session. Let's see if I can get to my next one here. Move some things over on my screen. Okay, so looking at the law in Virginia, and this is the code section, so you can easily look this up, and I think I have the website link at the very end of this slideshow, but that is the code section of Virginia. So if you aren't familiar with it, it's one of those ones where I have it memorized, 3.26503, care of companion animals by owner. And I sometimes wake up screaming at night with that code section blurting out of my mouth. But it's one of those ones that we use almost on a daily basis here in Richmond, and I know others throughout Virginia do the same thing, because we take everything from this code, and much of it branches off from this in how we deal with the public and how we work with the public, both in the shelter, in the field, just about anywhere. So this is the list. Each one of these I'll talk about in a bit more detail. But you have to have adequate feed. You got to have adequate water, adequate shelter that is properly cleaned, adequate space in the primary enclosure for the type of animal. And that's all depending on its age, its size, its species, the weight. And as we go through this, we're not limiting it to just dogs and cats, snakes, birds, the pocket pets such as rabbits, guinea pigs. Okay. Adequate exercise, adequate care, treatment, and transportation. And last but not least, the veterinary care when needed to prevent suffering or disease transmission. Okay. And all of this, the key to this is not just pet owners, but everywhere. Public or private animal shelters, foster care, pet dealers, pet shops, exhibitors, kennels, groomers, boarding establishments. So quite a number of entities that this code section applies to, and they are required to adhere to this, and they have to provide the basics that this code section sets forth. And violating it can get you in trouble. The misdemeanor offense for the initial incident, and then it gets a little bit more it gets a bit more strict if you continue to violate this code section and the different sections of this code sections, some of which could land you in jail if you have subsequent violations. And what does this all mean? What does this code, mean? Each different part. So let's kind of look at the different aspects of it. But first off, let's talk about companion animals and what is a companion animal. Let's get there we go. There's the actual definition. It's a lot. Okay, it's pretty much everything that we can think of that's not a wild animal or an agricultural animal. So dogs, cats, those are the traditional ones. Guinea pigs, hamsters, rabbits, birds, reptiles, the ones that are not native to Virginia. So quite a bit. So the sky's the limit, so to speak, when it comes to companion animals. So we just have to be careful. Some of us do, myself included, when looking at this code section. I often get kind of tunnel vision and I think of just dogs or just cats, but this applies to all the other types of animals that we might come across or deal with. Many shelters have rabbits. Folks have those as pets, guinea pigs, and birds, and all of those count under this code. Pet owners have to take care of them appropriately. Okay. So just some different examples that we could easily say, and interestingly enough, 3 out of these 4 animals are mine: the bird, the tortoise, and the puppy. Of course, she's not a puppy anymore. She's a much older dog. And of course, a rabbit. Okay, so all of those would count as companion animals. And how about this one? Might be cute and cuddly, and possums could be, I suppose, in some circumstances. However, not a companion animal. 100% wild animal. And so we would not treat this particular animal as a companion animal under Virginia Code, the 3.26503. Okay. What about this one? Cute cuddly chicken. Not a companion animal. Poultry, so it falls under the agricultural aspect of animals, which is a completely different code section, right? So we could not, even though people keep chickens as pets, definitely here in Richmond, folks can keep them as pets. They are not considered companion animals. Adequate feed. That's the number one. I mean, is it the most important? Possibly. But I don't think these are ranked in importance. But adequate feed is something that we have to look at and see how it applies to the animal or animals, companion animals that we're dealing with. Okay, And the definition, I should be able to read. It's fairly, fairly self-explanatory, and it talks about the amount of food that's appropriate, the type of food that is appropriate for the species. Some animals eat differently than others. Snakes, reptiles, birds. Maybe it's a puppy. Maybe it's an adult dog. Okay, and so their food needs are different depending on what the type of animal is, and the age or the size, the species, the condition, and so on and so forth. An animal that needs regular veterinary care may need a special type of diet, or it may need more access to food. Nursing mothers might need more food or a different type of food. So it's something that has to be taken into consideration of what the animal is. And it's got to be the right food for the animal. So thinking about, does this look adequate? There's absolutely no food. So not only do you have to have the right food, you actually have to provide food, period. So the animal has to have food, regardless of what it is. The pet owner or the entity that's under this code, they have to provide the actual food. Okay. Maybe you have a ferret. Maybe you have a dog, cockatiel, bird, cat. Okay. And certainly we can't dictate to people, the type of dog food that they get or should have. We can certainly recommend it. So those of you that have an aversion to, say, Alpo, for example, since I have a picture of Alpo up here, may not consider it the best food that there is, but it is dog food and it is for dogs. And if the person is feeding their dog food and the dog is in decent health, then that's perfectly fine. Now, from a personal level, we may have a different idea of what type of dog food should be fed to our dog. Some folks would, prefer that dogs get a raw diet and not something from the grocery store. So those are things that we have to just take into consideration, that, what does the law require when it comes to food? And it means that they have to provide the appropriate type of food for the animal in question. So dog food for dogs, cat food for cats, bird food for birds, and so on and so forth. Okay. And all of these would be considered adequate. Okay. Now, if somebody was trying to feed bird food to a cat or a dog, or cat food to a bird, okay, that's a little bit different. And and we can have a different conversation with the animal owner. So with adequate feed, you gotta know what type of animal you're dealing with. And if you don't know what the food needs are for the animal, then it's kind of up to you to find out and do a little bit of research of what the animal needs. Like, do you know what a sugar glider needs? Do you know what gerbils need? Do you know what hamsters are supposed to eat? How about a cockatiel? Okay, and so on and so forth. What type of bird is it? Or what type of animal is it? Is it a bird, and what type of bird? Okay, and enough of the right food for the type of animal. Got to be given in a clean and sanitary manner. Can't dump it on the floor, can't dump it on the ground. That just isn't how it works. Dumping it on the ground is not acceptable, has to be kept, keep it clean. This sometimes happens. We run across it. I know I have run across it on many occasions where the pet owner has put the food on the ground. Can't do that. There's bugs, feces, urine, it's just not appropriate. Same thing with an animal shelter or a boarding facility. They have to do the same thing. They have to keep it in a clean vessel for the animal to eat out of. Okay. And the food doesn't have to be present all the time, but it needs to be given at appropriate times. Sometimes we'll get calls for service where the individual will say, this dog doesn't have food or water. And when the animal control officer goes out there, the dog is in good health. So it's just like us. We don't necessarily have food and water in front of us 24/7, but the food must be given at appropriate times. So my dog, she's fed twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening, and that's perfectly acceptable. So there would be no reason for me to have a bowl of food out in front of her 24/7. Right? So sometimes that gets people where they feel like they don't see food, therefore an animal isn't being fed properly. Not the case. However, some animals might need a little bit more food. Puppies and kittens, definitely. They got to have a little bit more food and a little bit more often. Maybe a reptile. If you got a reptile, it might be a little bit different. Adequate water, that's another good one. Because water is needed, water has to be given. It's required for life. So the water is probably, in my opinion, would be the most important. Okay, and it has to be clean, has to be fresh, potable water, drinkable temperature. Okay, it's got to be provided in a suitable manner. Okay, rainwater doesn't count. Doesn't mean your dog or cat or pet can drink rainwater. It's just you have to provide the appropriate type of water. Okay, and it has to be in something that's suitable for the animal to drink out of. Now we're approaching, we're getting on to summer, and so the heat will be a factor. And if the water dish is out in the hot sun, that's not going to be drinkable water. It's not going to be at a temperature that is suitable. So that might be a conversation with the pet owner, is that the water needs to be fresh and of a suitable temperature. Doesn't have to be ice cold, but it doesn't need to be burning hot either. And the reverse would be in the wintertime. Ice doesn't count as suitable water. It is water, it is frozen, but the animal can't drink it in an appropriate way. So the pet owner is going to have to make sure that the water is available in the way it's supposed to be consumed. Okay? Liquid, not solid. Right? And whatever, again, we go back to whatever the species is. Some species can go without water for a longer period of time, and you, as the animal care control welfare person, kind of have to figure that out. You've got to decide, what am I dealing with? Is it a dog or a cat that needs water on a regular basis? Is it a reptile that may not need water as often, depending on the type of reptile? Is it a bird, small mammal? So things to be things to consider as you're dealing with and interacting with folks out in the community. Okay, the bowl has to be clean. The receptacle that it's in has to be cleaned. Has to be free of excrement and pests. How about that? It's a nice old bucket of scum water with pine needles for flavoring, I believe. And if I remember correctly on this particular one, the individual that I dealt with, or the situation, there was also mosquito larvae inside this water bucket, and that's all the dog had to drink. So I think I would offer up to the pet owner, if they could drink this too, right from the bucket, then I guess it would be suitable for a pet if the person can drink it too. So again, this would be completely unsuitable, inappropriate for pretty much anything. Okay, disgusting and not adequate. That's putting it mildly. Okay, same thing over here. We've got buckets filled with rainwater, leaves, some what looks like mold and mildew. Okay, so definitely not adequate. That doesn't work. Okay? That's got to be changed out and cleaned. Fresh water needs to be applied. So just some things with the water. Got to be accessible, got to be clean, fresh, potable. Okay, potable just means it's safe to drink. Tap water is okay, puddle water is not. Again, doesn't mean your dog can't drink puddle water. My dog drinks puddle water anytime we go for a walk. It's just I have to provide her the actual water that is required, that she needs, that the law requires me to provide. Okay. And it has to be given at suitable times and appropriate temperatures. Extra cool water in the summer. Doesn't mean you have to put ice cubes, but it needs to be cooler water. Okay. Unfrozen in the winter. Yep. Buckets, bowls of frozen over or snow, that doesn't count as adequate water. It is frozen water, but that's as far as it goes. It's not adequate. So that's where the line in the sand is basically, drawn. Moving on to adequate shelter. This is always a fun one, because there's some, sometimes there's some confusion with it and what needs to be done. It's a somewhat of a broad definition for adequate shelter. It's improved over the years. It's gotten more robust. It wasn't much to it when I first started, but now it's a better, there's a better definition for it. And it's long, so I'm not going to read, definitely not going to read this to you, but it has to protect the animal. Okay, that's kind of it in a nutshell. And again, it goes back to what's the species, the age, the condition, the size of an animal. You can't have a teeny tiny doghouse for a Great Dane. That just isn't how it works. It has to be suitable for the particular animal. And again, I go back to dogs as the primary thing that we deal with, but other animals too. You may have a snake in a teeny tiny aquarium. You may have a let's just say an 8-foot python, and it's in a 5-gallon aquarium. That might be too tiny. Okay, it probably is too tiny. So we have to consider the species and what the animal needs to have when it comes to adequate shelter. Right, has to help prevent the conduction of heat and cold weather. Has to have a windbreak. Hot weather needs to be properly shaded. And it needs to prevent the physical suffering, the effects of heat or cold. So all of these things that you have to take into consideration for the particular animal, and it has to protect it from all of these things. Okay, its feet can't go through the bottom. So sometimes rabbit cages that are raised up off the ground, as an example, if they have a wire bottom, the feet can't go through that wire bottom. They can't sag under the animal's weight either. So that wouldn't count as adequate shelter. Okay? And when there is a hurricane warning or there's a tropical storm warning, there's a heat advisory. So you have to prevent and have to add extra layers of protection in some cases for the animal when we have these National Weather Service announcements or alerts. Okay, and that leans more towards tethering of an animal. And it's incumbent upon the animal control officer to go out and actually look and see if there is a problem with adequate shelter as it pertains to the overall adequate shelter aspect, but also with tethering. Some localities, such as Richmond, prohibit tethering after an hour. For example, in Richmond, we only allow for up to an hour. But other localities, there is no time frame. So outdoor tethering has to also keep the animal safe and protected from the environment and the elements. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that in adequate space too. So again, just adequate shelter has to protect it from injury, rain, sleet, snow, direct sunlight. Okay, dog sitting out in the rain and has nowhere to go. That's not adequate shelter. Okay, underneath a porch, underneath a carport, not quite adequate shelter. Now, if you've just let your dog out to go to the bathroom and it runs up underneath the porch, that's fine because it's coming back inside the house. Protecting it from heat, cold, okay, physical suffering, impairment of health, all of these things. Adequate shelter has to protect the animal from all of these things. And again, it must be properly lighted and cleaned. Every now and then we run across folks here in Richmond where they have their dog, again, going back to dogs, they'll have them in a shed or a garage that has no windows or no lighting. That's inappropriate. You can keep a dog in a shed or a garage, but it has to be properly lighted. The animal has to have that ability to get light and dark, just because that's a normal biological thing that we, of course, humans do, but also most animals need. And it has to be cleaned. Okay, the animal has to be clean and dry, right? Or it has to allow the animal to stay dry, depending on the species. Some species might need a little bit more moisture. Some reptiles, amphibians might need a little bit more. Okay, properly shaded in the hot weather. Can't really have the doghouse out in the middle of the yard where the hot sun beats down on it. So that may not work. You may have the doghouse, but may not be adequate if it's out in the direct sunlight. Okay. And how about this thing here? May or may not work. I mean, it looks like that's a little bit of a training or a temporary thing, and that's fine. Folks do put their pets out during the day or for short periods of time, and that's perfectly okay. But if it's 24/7 or there's bad weather, you got to do something differently. Okay. Windbreak, bedding in the cold weather, right? This little guy's got plenty of bedding in there. Solid surface for dogs and cats. Okay. How about this? These are nice dog houses. Pretty decent ones. Got a wooden one, looks like it was handmade, and then you got the igloo one. So what might be some issues here? Needs windbreak and it needs bedding. Simple fixes that can happen. Okay. Here's a nice one. It's got the windbreak. Might need to throw in some bedding. Can't quite see it, but it's a nice little setup here. So tethering is part of adequate shelter, okay, and it has to keep the animal safe from predators. So, and maybe more rural localities, this may be more applicable. Here in Richmond, not as much, but again, we have a slightly stricter tethering ordinance than what the state requires. But it does need to keep the animal safe, okay, and it has to be well suited for the animal and well equipped to be able to tolerate its environment. So if the animal is outside in the pouring down rain, it's tied up, tethered, that's not going to count. That won't be, that will not be adequate shelter. Okay. And it can't be tied up or tethered during a hurricane warning, tropical storm warning that's been issued by the National Weather Service. There's a heat advisory issued by the local or state authority. We get that during the summertime. Or if the outdoor temperature is 85 degrees or higher, or 32 degrees or lower, okay? And during a severe weather warning. The only exception, there is an exception. If an animal control officer goes out there, inspects the individual circumstances, keywords, individual circumstances, and determine the animal is safe and well suited, then it's okay. But that's the key. The animal control officer needs to go out there and physically look and see what's going on. And as long as everything is okay and meets the basics, then the animal can stay tethered. So for animal control officers, investigate thoroughly and completely. Take pictures if you have to. Check the temperature, different types of things that can be used for temperature taking. The infamous blue barrels. So these are designed to carry stuff, not animals, carry chemicals and different types of products. And the material of a blue barrel is not too much different than some of these igloo dog houses. It's a type of resin, plastic type of thing that in and of itself, again, with crates, wire cages like that, none of these by themselves would be adequate whatsoever. So blue barrels, it's a sore spot for many in Virginia. But blue barrels, in and of themselves, would not be adequate shelter. Now, if you enhance them, if you make the blue barrel, it's got the bedding inside, it's got the windbreak, it protects from the adverse effects of heat and cold. It's got something over the top of it. It's raised off the ground. I think that would be a better setup than just the blue barrel by itself. Okay? So again, it has to meet all of those things for adequate shelter than just using the barrel by itself. Same thing would go with a crate or a wire cage. Those I think would be much more difficult to set up as adequate because they're not as solid as say the blue barrel is. A wire cage would be, in my opinion, would probably be near impossible to turn that into adequate. You might as well have a doghouse. You might as well have an igloo doghouse. Same thing with a crate. I mean, suppose you could wrap it in plastic or put some, some shavings inside, but then you got to take the door off. And by the time you do all of that, you're better off probably having gotten an actual doghouse. So again, in and of themselves, they are not adequate shelter. Blue barrels by themselves are not adequate shelter. If you want to enhance them, or you encourage the pet owner, you can enhance these things. That's a different story. And those can be then inspected to make sure that they're fitting all the parts and pieces of what's required for adequate shelter. So again, adequate shelter that is properly cleaned. Let me see if I can do, I don't know if you can see. So there's a bird right here. Hopefully my cursor is showing up. And look at that cage. There's no way that I could justify, or I could tell the owner that this is okay. This is beyond okay. It's horrifying. And I think that was one of the rare moments. Even though I try to keep my cool, I think I pretty much told this owner that this was totally unacceptable. I think I raised my voice a little bit, got a little bit angry, and told her how awful this cage and cages were, because there are other cages in this setup with other birds. So I had a fairly direct conversation with this pet owner as to how terrible this situation was for this bird as well as the other birds. Okay, so again, we often talk about and deal with dogs and cats, but birds and other animals are required to have adequate shelter too. That is properly cleaned. Okay, filthy bird cage, not clean. How about that? What seems to be the problem? There were actually, memory serves me correctly, this was a few years ago here in Richmond, there was about 4 or 5 of those dogs in that wire cage. And, you know, points for the person using cardboard, but this was a failure as far as adequate shelter goes, because cardboard, as we all know, once it starts raining, this cardboard is going to turn to mush, and it will completely go from, well, it wasn't adequate shelter to begin with, but it'll, what little adequate shelter it provided will be nothing once it starts raining. Plus the cage was too small for the number of animals that were inside of it. So nothing about this was adequate whatsoever. And it's got to be properly cleaned. So the state code does have a definition for properly cleaned. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. The contaminants have to be removed, no carcass, no food waste, debris, excrement, all that's got to be removed. Can't be in where the animal needs to bed down or lay down or get out of the elements. Okay? Has to be cleaned. How about this? This probably is going to be wrong. In fact, not just probably, it is wrong. That doghouse looks like it's seen some better days. I don't think there's anything in that water bucket whatsoever. So, you know, we're jumping back to adequate water. If it had food, who knows? But since we're talking about adequate shelter that's properly clean, I think it's safe to say that this is shelter that is not properly clean, and it's definitely not adequate. In fact, it's fairly horrifying with all that poop in there, and the way that animal can't really move around very easily. Nor can it go into a doghouse that even is acceptable, because the doghouse is falling apart. So complete violation here. Number 4 is the adequate space in the primary enclosure. Okay, you know, for whatever the type of the animal is, depending on its age, its size, its species, and its weight. Okay. A little bit more of disgustingness, okay? Things that need to be cleaned. So adequate space, again, another long definition, okay? And the animal essentially needs to have the ability to move around. Wherever it's being kept, it needs to have the appropriate space for that species and that type of animal. You know, whether it's an adult animal, it's a young animal, mammal, reptile, whatever the animal is, the appropriate amount of space needs to occur for that animal so that it can move around comfortably. The animal can be in a normal position It can interact safely with other animals in the enclosure. Okay. And this is where the tethering aspect of things comes into play too, a little bit more specifically, as it pertains to adequate space. Okay. It needs to protect the animal, and the animal has to be able to move around appropriately. That tether has to be on a properly applied collar, a halter, a harness. Some of the more common ones would be like a runner. People use runners, and that's perfectly legit as long as it's not getting tangled. The runner length or the tether is of an appropriate length, 15 feet in length or 4 times the length of the animal. And that's measured from the tip of its nose to the base of its tail. So whichever is greater. All right. Now, in some cases, the animal control officer can go out there and just check and see that the tether is at least 10 feet or 3 times the length of the animal. And that can be okay if that's a more suitable setup for the animal. But the animal control officer has to go out and look and see and make sure that that's a better setup than the 15 feet or 4 times. Okay. The animal can't get tangled up, right? It can't be tied to heavy objects or have heavy objects that would cause it to not be able to move around properly. Okay. It can't cause the animal injury or pain. So all of these things have to be, to be considered. Can't restrict the animal's movements. Okay. Again, just some refresher here for the adequate space. The animal has to be able to easily move around, has to be able to interact safely with other animals. Okay. And when it's on a tether, properly applied on a collar, a halter, a harness, whatever's appropriate for the animal, specifically in this case for a dog, can't get tangled. That's a fairly common one, unfortunately. Animals are tethered up or tied up and they get tangled. So that removes that whole adequate part once it gets tangled. 15 feet in length or 4 times the length of the animal. And again, the animal control officer should head out there if there's a concern, head out to the location to inspect and investigate it thoroughly. They need to take a peek, see what it looks like. Take a look and see. How about that? This dog could not, when I went out there to check on this situation, this dog could not stand up completely in this cage. And I think he was too long too. So this wire crate was completely inadequate for space. Had dog food, no water, but this dog could not easily move around, could not stand up properly. I think he was hunched over when he did try to stand up. And the cage was a bit too short for him as well. So definitely not adequate space for that dog. How about this? Dog is on a tether, or a leash in this case. Okay. And I'm pretty confident that this tether is way too short. I highly doubt it is 15 feet or 4 times the length of this dog. So completely inadequate. How about this? Chained up dog. That dog was happy. I remember it barking at me quite extensively. But look at all the debris. Look at all of that stuff in the way that this dog could get tangled up in very easily. And so this animal can't move around easily in the space that's provided. So the tethering, the adequate space aspect is completely wrong here. It just isn't going to be able to move around appropriately. And definitely a problem here, okay? Getting in the way of other animals, getting tangled up with other animals, interacting, safely with other animals. So this definitely is an absolute complete violation. There's lots of buckets too. I mean, there's dog houses. We got all of these other things going on, but as far as the adequate space aspect, there is no way in any world that this is going to be adequate. These dogs could not interact with each other safely because their tethers got completely tangled up. And so we were able to thankfully get these animals off of the tethers before they choked themselves to death. Okay. So this was a pretty direct example of what what adequate space is not, and what adequate tethering or properly tethering an animal. This is definitely not it. Adequate exercise. This one's the lesser known ones because it's not used, at least in my world or my experience, not used as often, but still an important part of the code, the companion animal code. And it's fairly short. Just means the opportunity for the animal to move sufficiently to maintain normal muscle tone and mass for the age, species, size, and condition of the animal. Now, doesn't mean you have to put your dog on a treadmill every day or take it for walks, in the neighborhood or in the park every single day, but the animal just does need to have the ability to move around and maintain its normal muscle mass. If you keep it in a cage all day long, or you keep it in a shed all day long, it's probably not going to work. The animal won't be able to have adequate exercise. Okay. So something like this. Again, it's going back to the tethering a little bit, but this animal's movements were completely restricted. In fact, that tether was tangled up on its back leg. So there would be no way if this dog had to stay like this. One, it's a violation of adequate space, but also this animal can't get the adequate exercise it would need because it can barely move around. So it would not be able to move around appropriately. So that was a short one. Another one that's fairly common here because it's somewhat broad in its ability to be used is the adequate care, treatment, and transportation. So thinking about adequate care, thinking about adequate treatment, two parts of this. It's fairly broad, and we use it quite often here in Richmond because the definition is good. I mean, it's a good definition, and it just means the broad look at the responsible practice of good animal husbandry, handling, production, management, confinement, feeding, watering, protection, shelter, transportation, treatment. Okay, so all of these things, even euthanasia, these could fall under the category of adequate care or care, and could apply to a lot of different things. Let's see if I have some some different issues. So pets being left in a hot vehicle, that could be cruelty, certainly, but it could also be adequate care. Leaving a dog in a hot car is not practicing good animal husbandry. So this code section would apply to that if a pet is left in a hot car. Again, it may not rise to the level of cruelty, but it's also not good animal husbandry. It's something to, to think about. How about a dog that's frequently allowed to run loose near a busy intersection? Again, not good animal husbandry. So animal, adequate care and treatment. If you let your dog run loose near a busy intersection and it does it frequently, and say it does get hit by a car and injured, or it causes a traffic accident, that's not practicing good animal husbandry. So this code section could easily apply to something like that. Here's one that's a little bit controversial: an unsecured dog in the bed of a moving pickup truck. Some animal control officers don't have the ability to pull vehicles over, and that's fine. Excuse me. You can write down license plates. You can do something differently, but this would not be adequate care, treatment, or transportation. If the dog is in the bed of a moving pickup truck and something happened to the dog, I think it could be argued that that would not be good animal husbandry, even though, unfortunately, many people do it. But it's something to consider, it's something to think about. If the animal, God forbid, were to get hurt, this code section might be appropriate. I don't know if it's on here. Well, here we go. The overgrown beak of a parrot. Okay, that might be something. It's a different type of animal. Okay. How about preventing humane euthanasia for a pet that's suffering? You have a conversation with the owner, and the animal needs to be euthanized because it has some kind of debilitating disease, or it has an issue that is causing the animal more harm, and humane euthanasia would be the answer in some cases. Not in every case, but maybe in this particular case that you're dealing with. Okay, so again, things to think about, different aspects of this particular section of the code. Okay. And again, definition of treatment or adequate treatment, it's fairly broad. The responsible handling or transportation of animals in the person's ownership, custody or charge and appropriate for the age, species, condition, size, and type of the animal. So appropriate treatment, okay? And a lot of things could apply to this. So keep an open mind when it comes to this section of the care of companion animals, that adequate care, treatment, and transportation is such a broad category that it can be used for many different things. And here in Richmond, we use it on a frequent basis when we run across pet owners that just simply aren't practicing good animal husbandry. Okay. How about these little balls of fur and fluff? Okay. Adequate care and treatment right here. These dogs need some definite grooming. So you could deal with a particular person that, okay, it's possible that it could be cruelty, but maybe it's also just not providing good animal husbandry, which is the adequate care and treatment aspect of the code. Okay. Definitely not adequate care or treatment. These are dogs that they need proper grooming. And if you as the pet owner want to do it, great. If you want to take the animals to a professional groomer, that's fine too. But the bottom line is that the pet owner has to provide this adequate care or treatment. And that means grooming these pets, grooming these dogs. So that's what they looked like then. And then when I did a follow-up, much better, much better. Okay. The person fed these animals very well, but she just didn't groom them as often as she should have. And they had fleas and I think they may have had parasites, but definitely the fleas, along with the terribly matted fur. So that fell under the category of adequate care and treatment. And that was something that could be addressed either through education or summons to court. So much better for these three dogs. They felt better. Of course, last but not least, veterinary care when needed to prevent suffering or disease transmission. None of us, want to have to deal with somebody that isn't providing veterinary care, but we will do it when we need to. And I don't expect everybody to be a veterinarian, and nor can we be a veterinarian, but we just need to be able to recognize certain things that are problems, that an animal might have, and when it might need veterinary care, whether it be immediate veterinary care or veterinary care that is needed to prevent suffering or disease transmission. Might not need to go to the vet right away, for example. So just the two different types. Veterinary treatment just means treatment by or on the order of a duly licensed veterinarian. And again, it has to be a licensed veterinarian. Can't be your neighbor unless your neighbor is a licensed veterinarian. Okay. An emergency veterinary treatment. I mean, exactly what it says. Veterinary treatment to stabilize a life-threatening condition, alleviate suffering, prevent further disease transmission, or prevent further disease progression. Okay. So pretty cut and dry right there for emergency veterinary treatment and just standard veterinary treatment. Okay. So we'll use an example. Should this dog get veterinary care? Absolutely. This dog has an open wound. Nice, friendly dog, otherwise healthy, but it has an open wound. I'm not authorized to fix this open wound. I'm not licensed, me as an animal control officer, to fix this wound. Okay. This needs to be handled by a licensed veterinarian, whether it be stitches, whether it be just a bandage to help keep it closed, antibiotics, and so on and so forth. But point being is that a veterinarian needs to take a look at this animal, okay, to make a determination. How about this one? I think we can all agree that this dog is very skinny. I mean, skin and bones is essentially what it is. And we can all say that we know this dog needs help. However, we probably need to make sure that that help includes, in fact, we definitely need to make sure that help includes an assessment by a licensed veterinarian. Because this dog may have internal issues going on that we just simply won't be able to see without the help of a licensed veterinarian. Does it have parasites? Does it have, some type of other internal ailment going on? Does blood work need to be done? So there's a lot of things that are going on here that this animal needs veterinary care. Right? And it's especially important for court cases. If you are taking an animal that looks like that and it doesn't get veterinary care, then that's going to be a huge problem. And getting close to the end, I think here. All of this stuff, everything applies to public and private animal shelters, releasing agencies, foster cares, dealers, pet shops, exhibitors, kennels, groomers, boarding establishments, okay? Not just pet owners, but all of the above. And you can get in trouble. This is a criminal offense. It's a misdemeanor offense in Virginia, okay? The very first violation of it is a class 4 misdemeanor, which means the worst that you could possibly get is a $250 fine, okay, per violation. Now, second or subsequent violations of the particular sections. So, for example, adequate food, adequate water, adequate shelter, adequate veterinary care. You know, if you have additional violations, subsequent or additional violations, now it gets a little bit more serious. It's still a misdemeanor offense, but it becomes a class 2 misdemeanor. And that means you run the risk of going to jail for up to 6 months, along with an up to $1,500 fine per offense. So it gets a little bit more serious. Okay? And then a second or subsequent violation of the other parts, adequate care, space, and exercise, is going to be a class 3 misdemeanor. Still up there, but the maximum fine for that one is $500. No jail time, but still, you get a $500 fine per offense if you have additional violations. And because, let me jump back because this is important. Because this is a state code, if somebody in, let's just say, Fairfax County gets in trouble and is charged with and convicted of violations of the care of companion animals for the first time, and then they move to Richmond, and we have a run-in with them, and we find that they've been charged in another jurisdiction, but because this is a state code, now it becomes, even though they live in Richmond now it becomes a second or subsequent violation. So it's kind of important to document all of this, and when a court case needs to happen, this is important. That way other agencies throughout Virginia can see and be able to look at, oh, this person's been in trouble before, so we need to do it a little bit differently. So just some things to think about. This dog looks pretty skinny. He's on a pretty thick chain. So there's definitely some adequate food aspects going on here. Probably some adequate space as it pertains to the tether. In this case, a chain that could probably pull a small airplane. That's how big that chain is. And if you notice, there's a padlock on the dog's chain. So don't want to steal that skinny dog. And a little bit different angle. The food bowls and the water bowls that have pretty much nothing in it. Dirt, leaves, twigs. So this animal didn't have much to go on, unfortunately. How about that? There's that wire crate that I said could be enhanced, but this doesn't even come close to being appropriate or adequate. And he's on a chain that looks like a chain leash that is most likely too small. He's got the shoes that are in the way. He looks like he's chewed on one of them. And this wire crate wouldn't even do any good anyways, because the front door of it is shut. It's closed. So this dog couldn't even get into the crate, even if it wanted to, for the protection of the plastic, because the front door of the crate is closed. So big problems here. Definitely we see problems. I'm thinking we could probably all agree on that. How about a snake? Some of you may not like snakes, but they have to be afforded appropriate care too. They have to be fed appropriately. They have to have the right size, enclosure, whatever that may be. They have to have access to adequate water as well, appropriate for reptiles, snakes in particular. Okay, so again, it's easy to think about dogs and cats, and again, we get a little bit of tunnel vision when we think about those animals, the dogs and cats, because lots of our focus is on them. However, we do need to make sure we take care of our other animals too, the reptiles and the small pocket pets, the birds, etc. There's a good one. This dog has its own swimming pool. Look at that. And if you can see the food down there in the kind of the lower left or left-hand side, it's more soup now than anything else. That particular person, I remember when I had the conversation with him, I told him they had to get this thing straight immediately, or I would have to take the dog and they would get in trouble. So they literally lifted the entire pen up in the air and moved it to a drier location where there was no pond. And so it worked out better. The dog was happier because you can see this poor dog is actually standing on the inside of the pen because it doesn't want to be in all that muck and wetness. And I don't blame it. Definitely some issues here. What do you think? Bunnies need care too. Look at all that disgusting glop, which I think is old moldy food and feces in the bowl, okay, and old moldy feces in that other metal tin that's hanging from the side. And about the only thing that's reasonably okay is that I don't think its feet can fall through the wire mesh, but everything else is horribly wrong. This animal has got a terrible setup when it comes to adequate food and adequate shelter that's properly cleaned. Just everything's wrong here except for the wire bottom of the cage. How about this one? Everything okay here? Could be okay, possibly okay. That chain may need a little bit lengthening. Okay, the dog can get away from the poop, can get away from the feces, but that probably needs to be cleaned up. It's not horrifying, but it's not great either. Okay. Well, let's take a quick review here. Owner's got to provide for each of his companion animals, and that includes dogs, cats, parrots, rabbits, guinea pigs, and so on and so forth. The adequate feed, got to be right food for the species at the right times. Adequate water, clean and fresh. Adequate shelter that is properly cleaned. Keep it cool, warm, clean, and watch that tethering. Adequate space in the primary enclosure. And again, it depends on the type of animal, the size, age, species, weight of the animal. Okay? Has to be enough room for the animal to move around, and the tether has to be long enough. Okay? Remember we talked about 15 feet or 4 times the length of the animal. Adequate exercise. Okay, the animal should be able to move around sufficiently for appropriate muscle mass, etc. Adequate care, treatment, transportation. Honestly, it boils down to good animal husbandry as you know, as the must in this, as the requirement. You got to be a good pet owner. And veterinary care when needed to prevent that suffering or disease transmission. Honestly, a visit to the veterinarian can absolutely do wonders. It's amazing what veterinarians do. And we often don't give them enough credit, but my God, if you need to take your pet to a vet, and we tell you to take your pet to a vet, you better take your pet to a veterinarian. It needs to be done. And again, that's just going to boil down to the situation. If your dog's been hit by a car, your pet's got to go to a veterinarian right away. Okay. If it needs something that's a little less, or needs care for something that's a little less serious, okay, maybe a few days, maybe a week. If it needs a rabies vaccination, okay, that can take a little bit longer to make an appointment. And again, we talked about this already, that this law applies to every public or private animal shelter in Virginia, all of us. Any other releasing agency, foster care provider, also this law applies to. A dealer, a pet shop, an exhibitor, a kennel, groomer, boarding establishment, all of these. Everybody has to adhere to the same rules. Okay, first time violations, a class 4 misdemeanor. second or subsequent violation of those, Class 2 misdemeanor. And then a second or subsequent violation of the other ones, the adequate care, treatment, transportation, exercise, and is a Class 3 misdemeanor. Okay. So the law that I mentioned, that's the website that anybody can go to, and I encourage everybody to look at it and to read it when you get a chance. It's fairly robust, and the definitions are in a different section. Okay. And that looks like that's about it for me. Try to get it in an hour. It's a lot of material. Leave it open for questions if there are any questions. Diana may have to help me with that a little bit. I'm supposed to remind everybody, if you need credit, put your name and email in the chat or email Diana. So I guess I'll open it up for questions if there's any questions. Diana, you still there?
I'm here. Sorry, had to unmute
Okay,
myself.
just making sure. I know you told me to make sure, and
Hopefully they can unmute themselves if they have questions. If not, I don't know.
I see, will we be able to get these slides? I can definitely, what would be the easiest way, Diana, just for me to,
Well, this whole session's been recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel.
oh,
So,
perfect.
whole meeting.
Perfect. Okay. And if anybody wants, I guess, the PowerPoint's kind of big, so it's hard for me to send it as a big PowerPoint, but I can email it to folks, I think, as a PDF. So if I save it as a PDF, I can also email it that way for anybody that wants a specific email.
I have the list of attendees. If you want to email it to me, I can send it out.
Oh, perfect. Even better. Even
Okay.
better. Then you can send it out. Yeah, that's excellent.
There's a question from Huck about backyard chickens.
Backyard chickens. So chickens would be poultry. And even if somebody has them as pets, they are not going to count as companion animals, even if you keep them as pets. In Virginia, the Department of Agriculture classifies them under agriculture, specifically poultry. So they do not count as companion animals. Rabbits, a little bit differently, though. Rabbits kept as pets only, count as companion animals. However, rabbits for food source would be agricultural. So you'd have to figure out what they are. Are they actual pets that somebody has, in a cage outside, or they have them in the house as a pet? Then it counts as a companion animal. But if they are used as food, then they would be agricultural animals for rabbits. Hopefully that helps. Did I get them all? I think somebody else, hopefully that got the rabbits and chicken one.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions.
Okay. And certainly folks are more than welcome to reach out to me at any time. I know I have great conversations with people all throughout Virginia and talking about the code sections. I've been doing it for a long time, and so I have a fairly good grasp of it. But when I don't know, I look to others for answers too. I guess doesn't look like there's any more.
I don't see anyone saying anything. Oh, wait. Okay, yeah, just people asking for the PowerPoint. So if you send it to me as a PDF, I'll just send it out to the list.
I can definitely do that.
Someone's asking a question about cat declawing.
Yes, and that should go into effect. I'm pretty sure it goes into effect July 1st, where it will be illegal to declaw cats. which a lot of veterinary clinics, I think, from at least my understanding, was few and far between to begin with. I think the only exception is if there's any kind of serious medical issue where the animal needs to have it done, I think. But just in general, declawing is going to be prohibited come July 1st. I see the question about chickens and rabbits. So chickens all day long, every single day, are always going to be poultry in Virginia. And they will fall under the agricultural animal code section, the broad category of agricultural animals, livestock, and poultry. So your cows, your horses, your pigs, your goats, your chickens. So again, horses can't even be counted as companion animals. They are agricultural animals. So chickens fall under that category. Rabbits, again, the difference with rabbits is if you're keeping them as pets or you're keeping them as a food source. So that's where the distinguishing factor is. If the rabbit's kept as a pet and a pet only, then it's a companion animal. If the rabbits are raised as a food source and a food source only, then they're going to be agricultural animals. So they'll be a little bit different. Hopefully that answers that question for Judy. How do you gain access to properties to see what is happening? That's a good one. If you can see it from the road, then that's just plain view. Doesn't necessarily mean you can get onto the property, but if you can see it from the road, or you pull up into the driveway and you can see it easily, then you have a little bit more authority, a little bit more say so. If it's behind a privacy fence, or if the animal's inside a house and the pet owner doesn't readily allow you to come in, but there's a problem, then you as the animal control person or law enforcement, of course, would have to get a search warrant. That's the only real direct way if the pet owner, is not allowing you to see the animal in question. So that hopefully answers that a little bit when it comes to being able to see what's going on. And it may take more than one visit. It might take a couple of visits. You may have to, maybe you can go into the neighbor's yard because they've let you, you're allowed to go into their yard and you can see what you need to see. And then you have a little bit more, you have a little bit more evidence, a little bit more probable cause to still get a search warrant in some cases, or in a lot of cases. Hopefully that helps a little bit for Mark. Who else? Any?
Thank you so much, Rob, for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Thank you all. Again, if anybody has any questions, any concerns, my contact information is there. Feel free to reach out to me. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the week.
You too. Take care. I think
All righty.
Yes, we're finished, so
Sounds that way.
thanks again.
I'm going to shut my stuff down here.
I'm getting more messages here for CE credit, so I'm not
Oh,
able
you
to.
are? Okay. Well, I'll put the I'll put it in an email to you, the PowerPoint.
Okay, that'd be perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's see if I can